1920. New York City is entering one of the most extraordinary decades in its history. Across Manhattan, the transformation is impossible to ignore. Electric lights illuminate streets that only a generation earlier depended largely on gas lamps. Automobiles compete with streetcars and pedestrians for space. Steel-framed buildings rise above the city. Radio is beginning to connect millions of Americans simultaneously. Motion pictures are becoming a national industry. And from Harlem to Broadway, a new cultural revolution is taking shape. America has emerged from the First World War as an increasingly powerful industrial economy, and New York is becoming its financial and cultural capital. For those arriving in the city, the scale can be overwhelming. More than 5 million people already live within New York's 5 boroughs. Immigrants continue arriving from Europe and elsewhere. Elevated trains thunder above crowded avenues. Subway tunnels carry enormous numbers of passengers beneath Manhattan. Construction crews work almost continuously as offices, apartment buildings, hotels, theaters, and commercial districts expand. But the clearest evidence of New York's ambition is visible simply by looking upward. The skyscraper is transforming the city. The Woolworth Building, completed in 1913, already rises nearly 800 feet above Lower Manhattan. But during the 1920s, the competition for height intensifies. Advances in structural steel, elevators, engineering, and construction techniques allow architects to build at scales that would have seemed almost impossible only decades earlier. By the end of the decade, the Chrysler Building is climbing toward the sky. Soon afterward, construction will begin on the Empire State Building. The modern Manhattan skyline is taking shape. At street level, another revolution is underway. The automobile is changing America. Henry Ford's moving assembly line and mass production techniques have dramatically reduced the cost of manufacturing cars. Millions of Americans who once regarded automobiles as luxury machines can increasingly imagine owning one themselves. The consequences extend far beyond transportation. Road construction accelerates, gasoline stations appear, repair shops multiply, oil consumption rises. New industries develop around rubber, glass, steel, petroleum, and automobile manufacturing. The geography of American life begins changing with the machine. Inside the home, another transformation is taking place. Electricity is spreading. Electric lighting extends commercial and social activity beyond sunset. New appliances promise to reduce domestic labor. Refrigerators, vacuum cleaners, washing machines, telephones, and other consumer technologies increasingly become symbols of modern living. Then comes radio. For generations, information has traveled primarily through newspapers, letters, telegraph lines, and direct conversation. Radio changes that relationship almost overnight. A single voice can now reach thousands, and eventually millions, of people simultaneously. News, music, advertising, political speeches, sports, entertainment, all transmitted invisibly through the air. By the middle of the decade, radio is helping create something unprecedented, a mass culture experienced by millions of Americans at the same moment. And nowhere is that culture more energetic than New York after dark. This is the Jazz Age. In Harlem, a remarkable cultural movement is underway. Musicians including Duke Ellington and Louis Armstrong help revolutionize American music, while writers and artists including Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, and Aaron Douglas become associated with what will later be remembered as the Harlem Renaissance. Jazz clubs, theaters, dance halls, and restaurants draw crowds deep into the night. But much of that nightlife exists inside a contradiction. Alcohol is illegal. In January 1920, nationwide prohibition takes effect. Its supporters believe banning the production and sale of alcoholic beverages will reduce crime, poverty, and social disorder. Instead, demand survives, and an enormous illegal economy develops to supply it. Hidden bars known as speakeasies spread through American cities. Bootleggers transport illegal alcohol. Police officers and politicians are sometimes corrupted. Organized criminal networks discover that prohibition has created an extraordinarily profitable market. The same decade producing unprecedented technological optimism is also producing increasingly sophisticated underground economies. Meanwhile, another industry is transforming popular culture. Cinema. Movie theaters attract enormous audiences. Charlie Chaplin has become one of the most recognizable entertainers on Earth. Hollywood is creating a new class of international celebrity. Then, in 1927, the jazz singer becomes famous for helping popularize synchronized dialogue in feature films. The silent era is beginning to end. Motion pictures can now speak. Within only a few years, Americans have watched automobiles transform transportation, electricity transform cities, radio transform communication, and sound transforms cinema. Technological progress appears unstoppable, and that confidence is beginning to influence something else: Wall Street. Throughout much of the 1920s, the American economy expands. Industrial productivity increases. Consumer markets grow. Corporations become larger. Credit becomes increasingly important, and stock prices rise. The financial market begins attracting people far beyond the traditional world of professional investors. Stories of rapidly accumulating fortunes spread through newspapers, brokerage offices, businesses, and social circles. For many Americans, Wall Street appears to offer something extraordinary: the possibility of becoming wealthy without waiting decades to do it. And there is a mechanism capable of magnifying those opportunities: margin. An investor does not necessarily need to provide the entire purchase price of a stock. Part of the money can be borrowed. When prices rise, leverage magnifies the return. But leverage contains another possibility. If prices fall, it magnifies the losses as well. For much of the decade, that danger seems distant. Stocks continue climbing. Companies such as General Motors, General Electric, and RCA become symbols of technological and economic optimism. Ticker machines distribute market prices. Brokerage houses attract growing numbers of customers. Newspapers devote increasing attention to Wall Street. Speculation becomes part of American popular culture. By 1928, the psychology surrounding the market is changing. Rising prices are no longer simply interpreted as evidence of corporate profitability. For many speculators, rising prices become justification for expecting even higher prices. Optimism feeds speculation. Speculation pushes valuations higher. Higher valuations attract more participants. And more participants reinforce the optimism. America begins convincing itself that a new economic era has arrived. But beneath the prosperity, vulnerabilities are accumulating. Debt is expanding. Wealth is unevenly distributed. Agricultural regions have already experienced years of difficulty. Banks remain vulnerable. And speculation has pushed parts of the stock market to extraordinary valuations. Then comes 1929. During September, the market reaches historic heights. But confidence begins to weaken. Prices become increasingly unstable. Selling intensifies. Then, on October 24th, panic arrives. Black Thursday. Investors rush to sell. Millions of shares enter the market. Prices fall rapidly. Some of America's most powerful bankers intervene in an attempt to restore confidence. For a brief moment, the strategy appears to work. The panic slows. But the underlying problem has not disappeared. 4 days later, on October 28th, stocks collapse again. Then comes October 29th, Black Tuesday. Selling overwhelms the market. Millions upon millions of shares change hands. Stocks once regarded as pathways to effortless wealth collapse in value, and leverage now begins working in reverse. Falling prices trigger margin calls. Investors need cash. To raise that cash, they sell. The additional selling pushes prices lower. Lower prices create more margin calls, And the cycle accelerates, fortunes disappear. But the stock market crash alone does not create the Great Depression. The economic disaster that follows is far more complicated. Over the next several years, thousands of banks fail. Credit contracts, businesses close, industrial production collapses, international trade declines dramatically. Unemployment eventually reaches catastrophic levels. The optimism that defined the 1920s gives way to one of the deepest economic crises in modern history. Yet the technology remains. The skyscrapers still stand. The subway still moves beneath Manhattan. Automobiles continue traveling through the streets. Radio continues broadcasting. Cinema continues evolving. The machines did not disappear. Confidence did. And that is what makes New York during the 1920s such an extraordinary moment in history. Within a single decade, millions of people experienced changes that previously might have unfolded across generations. Mass automobile ownership, electrification, commercial radio, consumer credit, modern advertising, talking pictures, skyscrapers, jazz, celebrity culture, financial speculation, new fortunes, new freedoms, and new risks. The decade offered Americans a glimpse of the modern world before they fully understood the dangers that accompanied it. Technology could make cities taller. Electricity could illuminate the night. Radio could connect millions of people. Factories could manufacture products at unprecedented speed. Financial markets could create enormous fortunes. But none of those innovations could eliminate something far older: human psychology, greed, fear, euphoria, panic, and the dangerous belief that prosperity can continue indefinitely. For someone standing in Times Square in 1920, the future must have appeared almost limitless. The city was getting taller, machines were getting faster, entertainment was becoming louder, America was becoming richer, and Wall Street seemed capable of climbing forever. They simply couldn't see the date waiting at the end of the decade. October 29, 1929. The day the optimism of the Roaring Twenties collided with economic reality, and New York entered an entirely different age.